Доброго ранку.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all our guests. Good morning, all the observers. And our first briefing is devoted to the topic, what can we learn from the experience of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs? And we have Ms. Bruce Yan, PTSD expert, clinical social worker from California, then Ms. Olha Yakovleva, head of the separate subdivision of NGO Development Foundation in Rivne, and Ms. Natalia Husak, head of the School of Social Work of the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. So you're welcome.
I'm glad to be here. I've been in Ukraine since the beginning of the month, and as I thought I heard was explained, I've been teaching at Kyiv-Mohyla a course in how to respond, how social workers can respond to emergency events, catastrophic events, and I've been doing other speaking engagements on behalf of the Development Foundation, which is headquartered in Lviv, and the chairperson is Marta Pivorenko. And we have, since I've been here, we have been to Rivne and Ostro, Berdichev, and Zhytomyr, and it's been a full month. And am I going to be asked questions, or is there something you would just like me to begin talking about?
Maybe first of all, I'd like to ask you, what are the key principles that the ministry in the US uses to deal with this problem of rehabilitation, socialization of people who are coming back from the front line to help them come back to peaceful life?
Yeah, so if I understand your question, you're asking what are the guiding principles, key principles to what the Department of Veteran Affairs, who has been charged by our federal government to provide a wide array of services for veterans, from medical treatment, mental health treatment, vocational training, help with going back to school for education, to look for better employment. And I would say that the VA, I worked for the VA for 28 years, and the VA was always in continual change. It's the largest medical system in the world, and it's well placed geographically in the United States, with some 272 hospitals, many outpatient clinics, and also there are community placed clinics that are referred to commonly as vet centers. They are part of a separate branch of treatment for veterans in the VA, officially called the Readjustment Counseling Service. And what's relevant to this question is the Readjustment Counseling Service was formed about 5-6 years after the Vietnam War ended. And its purpose was to provide an alternative to the bureaucracy and institutional appearance of the VA, of the big hospital. These were clinics that were often put in homes that were available, and so they were in neighborhoods. They weren't even necessarily in commercial districts, and they were supposed to be very user-friendly. One of the, I think, and I'm not speaking as a representative of the VA. I no longer work, retired from federal service 5 years ago. I thought one of the great advances during my career with the VA was when General Eric Shinseki was appointed as the VA secretary. And he made an effort to really make the VA veteran-centric, as it was called. That the VA was really based on providing veteran services first and foremost. It wasn't meant to create a system that worked for itself, but worked for veterans. And there were, I was quite stunned because he did things such as, simple idea, anyone who worked for the VA could submit an idea for change. And they were read, and the good ones were instituted. One of his deputies gave a talk at a national conference for VA mental health workers, and he talked about innovation, new ideas that the VA would try and be open to, not necessarily only evidence-based treatments, but the fringe treatments that hadn't been officially studied, things like yoga, meditation, where they've been in use for centuries, but at that time, social science hadn't supported it. So I was listening to him, and I was like, gee, well, okay, great ideas. Will it happen? It did happen. And the VA became a very innovative organization. The difficulty VA has had has been that because the wars have continued and we have more and more military involved with combat and combat with people that don't necessarily wear uniforms. That creates another layer of difficulty for soldiers. And so those seeking treatment were put on wait lists. They couldn't get in. And the wait time was significant. It could be 2 or 3 months. And if you put that finding next to the finding of 20 to 22 veteran soldiers committing suicide a day, you have to change. You have to make a change. And changing the VA is difficult. It's like trying to turn the battleship, as they say, with your hands. It takes a long time because it's such a big organization. Another, I would say, guiding principle that helped the VA progress was when treatment first started for post-traumatic stress disorder. It was everybody's own individual idea as what constituted a treatment for PTSD. And the difficulty with that was if a veteran went to Florida, for example, the state of Florida, it could be any state, I'm just picking Florida, and he or she received treatment. If they were to move and go to California or Nevada or any other state, they might not receive the same treatment. And the VA thought, we need to change that. And they came up with what they referred to as uniform services. So that it meant that regardless of where you sought treatment, regardless of the facility, the treatment would be the same.
Okay, I would like to ask you to provide some insight on what happens when a soldier comes back from a mission somewhere where he participated in combats. How he is treated? Does he undergo any study by medical workers to understand his condition at the moment to find out whether he requires any treatment right now or later. So what is like this chain of work with people who are coming back from the front line?
I'm sorry, but my hearing isn't very strong, and I couldn't quite make out all you were saying, and I don't hear anything in my ears.
Excuse me, I'll say that once again. Could you please provide some details? What happens to a soldier who comes back from the mission? How he's treated then, when he's studied by medical workers to understand his condition? How much time does it take? What are all these time frames, and so on and so on?
Good question. My answer, though, would be out of date because I haven't worked for the VA in 5 years, and there may have been changes put in place that I'm not aware of. But typically, any veteran who was in a combat area would be given a screening for PTSD. It might probably more commonly was what's referred to as the PCL, the PTSD checklist. And it's fairly short. It doesn't take more than 5-6 minutes to complete, and doesn't take very long to look at and make some estimation anyway of whether the veteran was exposed to traumatic stimuli and what impact that exposure has had on him. So I was not on that front line of admission. I was pretty removed because after I worked with combat veterans in 1984, 1985, 1986, 1991, 92, but the rest of the time my work was in the clinical response, the community response to catastrophic events, and the state level response to such events, as well as the federal and national response to catastrophic events. I had an unusual career. Even though I was within the Department of Veteran Affairs, I worked for an agency named the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress. It was one of 26 centers of excellence in the VA and really became the leading source of knowledge globally. But the legislation that created the National Center allowed our staff to work within communities to share the knowledge. It wasn't necessarily meant to be only used inside the VA. And so I was detailed to initially for 2 weeks, but it became a career. And I had the chance to respond to earthquakes and tornadoes and floods and hurricanes, bombings, 9/11, airplane crashes, both in metropolitan and urban areas, events where there were mass casualties and events where there were few casualties, events that involved children, and pretty much my population of service was anyone who lived within the United States. So I have thoughts about treatment of veterans, specifically related to PTSD, but the bureaucratic procedures, the operational procedures, I'm not very familiar with inside the VA.
I have one more question to ask. I'm very surprised and inspired to hear that the VA is constantly changing and trying to improve methods it used to make the treatment more efficient and really helpful for the people. Because usually these procedures, these institutions are very rigid. They don't like any change, and this is the same problem in Ukraine. in your opinion, how do you manage to achieve this situation when this institution constantly finds out something new and provides innovations, research, and so on?
How do we use the information to change? Is that the question? I'm not sure exactly.
I mean, what is the mechanism that is making this bureaucratic institution to change its work constantly, to improve its work?
Yes. So there's more than one mechanism. Each VA hospital is affiliated with a medical school. And within the medical school, it's a win-win. The medical school gives the school and physicians in training access to patients. And it also allows the VA to receive the benefit of social scientists at that university who can use the aggregate populations receiving services in the VA. And so they apply for grants. Sometimes it's money from the VA, sometimes it's from another agency to study issues related to treatment of veterans or the impact of events on veterans. So it can come locally, just from a professor's interest, and the professor, he or she will have their own research machine, so to speak, their own staff, and all that's included in the application of a grant. That's one. Two, there are many now researchers inside the VA, social science researchers, who have direct access to veterans. Interestingly enough, when they apply, part of the review process is from the university. I forget, it's a something review board, but it's meant to protect patients. And so you have an outside organization reviewing the application to ensure that patients are treated in a humane way, in a fair way, and that if whatever intervention is being studied, if it should cause a negative reaction in the veteran receiving treatment, there is a specific plan on how to respond to that. The other mechanism is just in the way that the higher administration informs itself and says, we want this done. And so it can come down as a mandate from VA headquarters, central office as it was referred to.
Thank you for your answer. It's really inspiring to hear that an institution may be working for people, not only for itself. And I think it's high time we pass the floor to other two speakers, to Ms. Yakovleva, for example. Пані Ольга, розкажіть нам, будь ласка, власне, вашу думку з цього приводу.
Доброго дня.
Good morning. Mr. Yan mentioned that he worked with the victims of catastrophes, but we met on Skype when he provided some advice to us, and when we had problems in Rivne region, and when I've heard that Mr. Bruce was going to visit us, I was extremely happy, and he expressed his wish to meet with those who are coming back from the combat areas and with those who requires stronger attention than usually. And in Rivne, we have a special military hospital for the veterans, and we took Bruce to this hospital. And the idea which Bruce had brought from America, from the United States, it is very appealing for us here and now. The idea is that the veterans had defended the state, the country at the front line, and now the country has to take care about the veterans. And in Rivne, we have established a unique network comprising participants of the combat activities, families of those soldiers, the veterans, social workers, etc. This is a unique project because all the involved people, all subdivisions of this organization, they have the common goal to restore respect to the veterans, to deliver proper services, to deliver information, and allow the participants to get proper information. And this is very important. In Rivne region, we had a very tough case when a young guy died, and a mother of that guy who worked with Bruce, now she's able to work with families of other killed soldiers. And now we have established ties with the Ministry of Defense, etc. They are studying now our practices. From the very beginning, Bruce had been speaking that the revival of trust, rebuilding of trust between the veteran who had come home and his family is extremely important. The veteran should be confident that there are places where in which he can trust. Recently we had a meeting with the deputy governor in our region. And we discussed how we can strengthen respect and trust between a community and the veterans. And then we met with a strong academy professors, social workers, the students from the Institute of Public Health in this strong academy. And this is very important because this young generation found understanding with Bruce. They spoke one language, and this shows that we have hope. Then we had a meeting in Klevan Hospital of the veterans of combat activities participants, and we also established good ties with them. Bruce visited the recently established center of neurotraumas in the Klevan Hospital, and established communication. our communication with Bruce, the work of our social workers who had this experience of communicating with Bruce, they've got this precious experience seeing how international community is ready to assist us. I would like to say that 1 month of Bruce's visit will be enough to discuss a lot of things, to meet with many people. One of the major objectives of Bruce's visit was to share his experience of clinic social worker. And we wanted to demonstrate to the students what clinic social workers can do in emergency situations and in the situation of war. Because there is a big difference between the knowledge that you get from textbooks and the real experience of a person who has huge practical experience. And when Bruce shared his huge knowledge, his huge practical knowledge with the students, saying that in this or that situation you should use proper words and proper approaches. What we understood in result of Bruce's work, the huge role of social workers in difficult situations for those people who have war experience. Today we have a lot of volunteers, social workers or family members of the former soldiers which have no formal education and have a very different practical experience. So one of the objectives of Bruce's visit was to establish such a center of excellence, providing consultancy for these people. The second was to review available practices inside the country. And our objective is to review how, to understand how this or that specific practice influenced those people who were delivered the service, and what is the difference whether the service was delivered professionally and what was the impact on the life of the patients. And the third major aspect of Bruce's visit was that the skills which he mastered and which our volunteers have to master too, the ability to listen and then the ability to hear and then the ability to decide, the skill to decide what could be done for such a person and what professionals could or should be involved. After yesterday we met with the Coalition of Sustainable Development, which is chaired by a veteran. And they once again repeated a message which we heard earlier from many veteran organizations, that employment is extremely important important for the veterans. When veterans come back from combat activities, the first thing to do is to find employment, is to find a job for him or her. Because the veterans does not want to go to social workers, to psychologists for assistance. They have their own ideas and their own needs, and we have to meet these needs, these requirements, and probably this will be efficient. In result of all those work, of all those meetings, whether you had come to some outcomes which could be discussed with authorities in order to institutionalize them.
Це планується, але це планується.
The Center of Excellence is one component which will be under the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, and it is not within the responsibility of authorities. As for the models or mechanisms, we haven't decided yet about specific models. I do not think that we have to change legislation first. We should see what works the best and then reflect this in legislation. When we will have evidence-based practices and prove that they are efficient, then we will need to change the rules of the game at the power level. That's why we need flexibility. And as of this moment, I'm a bit scared to retranslate the practices which could be improved.
Time and in your experience, it's very important for us. Дякую усім, на цьому будемо завершувати.
The translator was